Why Cadmus founded a city. 1. The loss of Europa. One day, a little girl called Europa was playing in a meadow by the seashore. She sat on the grass with her lap full of flowers and was plaiting the flowers into wreaths for her big brothers, Cadmus, Pahonix, Phoenix, and Cilix, who were not far away. Suddenly she looked up and saw a snow-white bull with beautiful silvery horns standing near her. At first she was afraid, but the bull seemed so gentle and looked at her in such a friendly way that she lost all fear of it. Taking some clover blossoms from her lap, she ran up to it and held it to its mouth. It ate the flowers daintily from her fingers and then began skipping around on the grass almost as lightly as a bird. Finally, coming to the place where Europa was plaiting her flowers, it lay down by her side. She patted it and threw some wreaths over its horns and clapped her hands to see how pretty it looked. After this, she climbed up to its back. When it got up and galloped around the meadow with her, Europa, holding on by one of its white horns, laughed and enjoyed the ride, and did not notice that the bull was taking her farther and farther afield, and closer to the shore, till it suddenly jumped into the sea and began to swim away with her. Then she was frightened and screamed for her brothers, who heard her and ran down to the shore, but they could not stop the white bull. Europa was carried off and was never seen nor heard from again. When the three brothers told their father, King Agenor, what had happened, he was quite broken-hearted and very angry besides. He said that little Europa should not have been left alone, and he blamed Cadmus more than the other brothers because Cadmus was the eldest. Finally, he said to Cadmus, "Go and find Europa and bring her back, or if you cannot find her, never enter the doors of your father's palace again." In those days, one could not go far from a walled city without meeting with many dangers. Hence, in order that Cadmus might not be entirely alone, his father sent 2 slaves to bear him company. When the great gates of the city closed behind them, the 3 started out, walking toward the west, as that was the direction the bull had taken. They passed through lonely forests. They crossed mountain chains. They contrived to make their way across the sea to other lands, but they could not find Europa, nor hear any news of her. Cadmus felt quite sure that the search was useless. Chapter 2. Cadmus and the Dragon. As Cadmus did not dare to go home without his sister, he asked the oracle at the shrine of Apollo what he should do. The shrine of Apollo was in a cave at the fountain of Mount Parnassus, and the oracle was a mysterious voice that seemed to come from the heart of the mountain. The voice told Cadmus to follow a white heifer he would see, and afterward to build a city on the spot where he saw her lie down. After leaving the cave, Cadmus hardly had time to scramble down into the road again before he saw a white heifer, which he followed as the voice had told him to do. When the heifer came to a certain beautiful valley, she raised her head as if she were looking up to heaven, and then made a great lowing, after which she lay down, seemingly quite contented with the spot. Cadmus knew that this was the place where he must build his city. Near the spot the heifer had chosen was a grove of very old trees, and among the very old trees in a rocky place was a cave. The mouth of the cave was so choked with willows that one could not see what it was like inside, but Cadmus thought he could hear water trickling down, and the sound seemed so cool and inviting that he went in by himself. Just kidding. He sent one of his slaves by himself to go and look for a spring. The man did not come back. Then Cadmus went in. Just kidding again. He sent the other slave to see what had become of the first one, but that one did not come back either. So Cadmus threw a lion's skin around his shoulders, took his lance and his javelin, and went into the mouth of the cave himself. At first it was so dark inside that he could see nothing. When his eyes had become accustomed to the change from the bright sunshine he had just left, he saw in the darkness 2 bright spots, and he knew they must be eyes of some beast. As he could see better, he made out the form of a huge dragon lying with one of its ugly claws across something, which he feared might be the body of one of his faithful slaves. He took up a large stone and hurled it straight to the creature's head, but the scales of the dragon were so hard and so tough that the stone rolled away without doing it any harm. Then he threw its javelin at it and wounded it with that, but being much disabled, the creature came out of the cave, hissing and attacking him fiercely. As it came near, he pushed his lance straight into its open mouth and finally pinned it to an oak tree which grew there and so killed it. As Cadmus stood looking at the dead dragon, he realized that although he killed the monster, he'd lost his 2 slaves and was alone in a strange country where, without help, he would have to build the city ordered by the oracle. Just then he was aware that someone was standing by his side. He looked up and saw a tall, strong-looking woman with clear grey eyes. She had a lance in her hand and a helmet on her head. He knew at once that it was the warrior goddess Minerva, and as he looked at her, he felt his courage coming back. Minerva told him to plow the ground near and sow the dragon's teeth. This seemed like a strange seed to plant, but Cadmus did as he was bidden to do, and then stood waiting to see what would happen. After a short time, the soil began to heave up in little places as it does when corn is growing. Then inside a blade of corn, sharp steel points began to show. As they came up farther, these looked like spear points, and helmets appeared along the rows. Finally, fully armed men had grown out of the earth and stood looking around fiercely, ready to fight. Cadmus thought he had had a worse enemy now than the dragon, and made ready to defend himself, but there was no need. For the armed men were hardly out of the soil before they began fighting, one with another, and they fell so fast that only 5 were soon left. But these last 5 were wiser than their brothers, for they saw that they gained nothing by killing one another. Instead, they threw their arms on the ground with a crash and shook hands to see what would come from helping others. This worked much better. Cadmus shook hands with the rest, and they all united to build the city on the spot where the heifer had laid down. The new city was called Thebes. It was prosperous, and all lived there happily for many years with Cadmus as a king. The end.